Jay, what is going on,
Hello.
man?
I'm good. You?
Good. Good to see you. Good to see you. Loving the shirt, by the way. Heck yeah, awesome. Jay, how's it going? Good to see you. Good to have you back. Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with your session. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Jay here, senior coder and interactive email specialist over at Action Rocket, presenting to you Which Please. Anything's possible in email. Code techniques to transform your messages. If you guys have anything, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw those in the question tab. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a moment with the presentation. And remember to upvote your questions that you see pertinent to the subject so we can make sure we stay on topic. And Jay, I will go ahead and let you take it I will go ahead and let you take it away, my friend. I'm going to go ahead and walk around email camp, making sure everyone's all right. Maybe terrify some people, but you know what? I'll see what I can do. But go ahead and Jay, you can take it away, my man.
Cool. So yeah, welcome to Which Please. Anything's possible in email. Code techniques to transform your messages. I'm Jay. I'm a senior coder and interactive email specialist at Action Rocket. And I'm going to get started. So we're going to talk about three different things: CSS background images, external style sheets, and CSS variables. And what is this talk about? Basically, when I started doing email development, everyone told me that it was based back in the 90s, had to use tables, you couldn't really enhance your emails, it was all quite boring. And I just didn't really like that idea. And I saw lots of emails around doing lots of cool things. So I decided I'd take a look as well, have a look under the hood and check out the code and see what was going on. And I found out that you can do a lot of the things in email that you think you maybe couldn't do. So a few things here, like the first one on the right-hand side, win a year's supply of chocolate. That's just using the CSS checkbox technique to, when you check on two different cards and they match, then you get the congratulations, you've matched the two correct cards. So that one's kind of a simple checkbox technique to click on multiple cards and then you get the winner. And then in the center there, you've got a form box, which actually works inside email. So a live form search box that you can type into. And once you type into the search box, you can put in anything you want to, hit enter or hit the search icon, and it will take you straight to a website where it will show you all of the things that come up. And then lastly, on the left-hand side, you've got the calzones. So it was a live poll that when you clicked on one of those buttons to click on, like in an Instagram kind of poll, it came up live with the results when everyone was voting on it as soon as we sent the email. So there's a few different things that no one thought was possible, and they are possible, and there's lots more. And the techniques I'm going to go through now are going to expand on what is possible. So the first one is CSS background images. Now, the background images I'm talking about are the background image URL with your image in the head of your email. So that's not part of the body, that's inserted into the head. And the difference is that anything between the two body tags in your email, they download as soon as you open the email. So everything from the start of your body tag to the very end will download anyway. So even if you've got a mobile image that's hidden and it's opened on desktop, that mobile image will still be downloaded. The difference with the background image in the head is that they're only loaded once it's needed. So it's only loaded, say, for example, if you hover on something and a background image appears, something is checked and then another image appears, or the @media query or @supports would only pull in that image if it's required. So we can use that in different ways. And the support for these background images is quite wide. And even though the background image itself won't display very well on the Outlook desktop on Windows, the technique still works where it won't actually be called unless it's needed. So you could wrap it in MSO comments or something like that, and the image would only load for Outlook. So you could use it to track opens of that image, even if nothing else. And the background image will work everywhere else anyway. So what can we do with these CSS background images? One is we can put in live images on click. So like I did with that poll, like I showed you with that poll earlier, that once you clicked on something to load it, that image would then load with a live image that's directly only loaded once you click. The second one is load an image based on email client with CSS targeting. So using maybe howtotarget.email, which is a website which gives you loads of different CSS techniques that using certain selectors that are only working in certain email clients, you can use those to just show a background image, which is only relevant to those clients. So maybe you only want to show someone in Gmail a background, an image of something, or maybe someone in Apple Mail or any of the email clients out there, you could show a different image based on which email client they were using. Third is you can use the same techniques to load tracking pixels. So you could detect different screen sizes or user preferences, such as a dark mode media query. Maybe you load an image only when it's in dark mode. Or maybe you're detecting who uses a smaller screen to help your designers when they're designing emails. And lastly, you can save on loading times by only loading what is needed. Like I said before, when everything between the two body tags is loaded, so if you put loads of images in there, every single one of those images is going to be downloaded from top to bottom. So the images at the bottom of your email are going to load last. And if you've got lots of big GIFs or lots of big images, maybe you could add some in the head of your email, and then those would only load when they're actually needed and not all the time. So one thing you could do is a live poll. So similar to this calzone one, you had two different buttons there, a button to choose which one was your favorite calzone. Each button had a separate image link which would load when clicked. And what we did was, using that click, we made a server request to our server. And on the back end, we did some maths and we did some like proxying, so that when you clicked on a link, it would register that vote, and then it would go to a HTML page and it would load the percentages, like the image that's being shown with the different results. And we would take a screenshot of that image, and then that image would then be loaded into your email. And we would do that every 30 seconds or so. So if you kept clicking on one to vote, it wouldn't update straight away, but after 30 seconds, it would update different winning votes. So basically, using that CSS background image only loading once it was requested meant that it would only show you the live results once you clicked on it. So if loads of people opened the email at the same time and clicked on that vote button, when they clicked on it to vote, it would give them exactly what everyone was voting for at that time. So there's lots of different uses for this. So a simple code technique, so I'm going to go through some code, and what you can do is create just a very simple tap to reveal, which will only reveal an image once you click on it. And this technique would then only load that background image once you clicked on it. So setting up the HTML, you would have a label wrapped around an input with a div, which has just click me to reveal the image. And then once you clicked on that, that would then set something off in the head. So this is the CSS for that HTML. So when that input is checked, and then the next element, which has a class of kitten, we would add a background image, which is the place kitten. So then that means that only that place kitten URL, that background image, would only load once you actually clicked on that button. So it would be a perfectly live image. Second is, you could code an image that was only specifically for dark mode. So you could have the style in the head there with your root with the color schemes that are supported. And then using the @media query of prefers color scheme dark, and then adding in our HTML a div with a class of dark mode, then that dark mode background image would only show when it was requested. So you could use this to track how many of your users would open a dark mode email. Specifically in this case, the prefers color scheme media query is only supported by certain email clients, but it would show you how many of your users on that email client would be using dark mode. So secondly, the second technique we're going to go through is external style sheets. So an external style sheet is hosting a CSS file on your server and then linking it into the HTML. Normally with HTML emails, we create a head in the top of the email and we use style tags. And the style tags hold our CSS. And that CSS there is embedded in the email. By using an external style sheet, we add a separate file, which is just for the CSS. We place that somewhere else and we link to it from the HTML to get it there. So it kind of places it in a different place. And the support for the external style sheet is quite extensive. Gmail doesn't support it in Yahoo, but Windows Desktop Outlook does support this. But yeah, Samsung and Apple Mail also support it. So what can we do with an external style sheet? One thing you can do is change styles after send. So when you send an email and you've embedded the CSS within your email within the head, you then can't change that CSS after it's been sent. If you have an external style sheet, you can reload that style sheet the same way that you can reload an image later on. So you can change the styles after you've sent. So maybe something's incorrect, or maybe you want to change something based on whether there's been a sale or something like that, then this could definitely be used to change things. You could swap a whole style sheet. So if you wanted to give a different style sheet to an email for a different person, for a different recipient, or maybe, like I said before, if something's changed in your marketing and you wanted to swap a whole style sheet, maybe you wanted to change the colors, you would be able to do that with an external style sheet. You could change CSS background image links. So by having the image link in an external style sheet, you can not only have a live image by having that background image technique that we showed before, you can also change that link because you've got it in an external style sheet. So you can constantly be updating what's going on and constantly be changing what's possible with that image link. Fourth is you could build from an API or a server request. So instead of your style sheet being set in stone once you've made it and it's embedded in the email, or even if it's external style sheet and is created and left alone, what could happen is you could make that style sheet based on a server request. So when someone opens your email, it would request that this external style sheet was there so that it could get its styles, and you could use that request to start building your style sheet. That means that you could change it based on different stock that you've got in or different styles, or possibly you could do, well, you could do anything basically, build it from an API and create something totally random. Number 5 is you can hide and show different parts of your HTML. With a little bit of forethought, in the HTML, you could add maybe lots of things that you wasn't sure if you wanted to hide or show. So you could have multiple products that were going to run out soon, like last chance to buy or something like that. And using an external style sheet, you can actually, as long as the HTML has classes or IDs so that you can reference them in the CSS, you could change what was shown in an email after it was sent. So you could have different deals that say last chance to buy, or this product has run out of stock, or something like that. And as long as it's all in the HTML, you can hide and show it as you go along. And lastly, you can personalize an email with the CSS. So instead of creating, if you've got a database of 1 million people and you create, you didn't want to create 1 million different emails, you could, on the server request, create a personalized email with the CSS that is external. So only someone that opens it, and then you could take their preferences into account, and then you could give them their own personalized email with an external style sheet. One thing I looked at was kind of using the NFL, the branding that they've got for the different teams. And there's quite a lot of things you can do just by swapping out some CSS. So you could have swap the badges using a background image, so based on their favorite team. You could change the background colors based on their team colors. You could even add gradients or other background images for buttons or other elements. But basically anything that you want that you can change in the CSS, and with a bit of forethought with the HTML, you could also change in the email. So everyone's email could be completely personalized by having an external style sheet and just changing some CSS. The code itself for linking an external style sheet is relatively simple compared to the other parts. So in the head of your email, instead of having 2 style tags with the styles inside it, you would just link with a relative of style sheet, and then it would have the href would just hold the link to your style sheet. And possibly, if you wanted to, you could make that link, you could make it so that the recipient had maybe a unique ID or something like that, and that unique ID could populate that style sheet, and that could give a totally different style sheet based on that. And in the HTML, you could just use the class of color change, and basically using that color change class, you could use that to target the different parts of your HTML. So linking a style sheet, only at the moment within all email clients, only Gmail app non-Gmail accounts need inline styles. Everything else can work with embedded styles, so using CSS in the head. And then a lot of clients do support these external style sheets. So CSS that is imported is considered to be before the embedded CSS. So if you think about the cascading style sheet and the way it works, if you have something in your HTML and you have an inline style next to it, that is going to have the strongest link to that piece of HTML and is going to style it. If you then move one step away to the embedded CSS in the head, if there's nothing in line, then the embedded CSS will be next. And then if there's nothing in the embedded CSS, the next part will be the external CSS. So the way I like to think of it is the thing that's closest to your style element is normally what styles it. So anything that you want to style your element that has to be included, that needs to be there, even if the external style sheet didn't load, or if it was opened in the Gmail app non-Gmail account, should be inline styled. And then using the embedded styles and the styles from an external style sheet should only be used if you want to enhance the HTML. But of course, you can use important to override inline styles and embedded styles. So if you have an ID which has super specific specificity in CSS, you could add an important on that on an external style sheet, and that would still affect your HTML. So just to sum that up, if you want everything that is important to your email, everything that has to be shown should have inline styles and be as close to the HTML as possible. And then embedded styles could be used to progressively enhance that anywhere external style sheets are not supported. And then external style sheets can be used to enhance your email even further. And then one technique you can use is put anything that's for your interactive CSS, you can put that in your external style sheet, because only clients that support interactivity will support external style sheets. So saving that 100 kilobyte limit that you've got just in case for Gmail, put any of that large blocks of CSS in an external style sheet, and then that will keep the load quite low. Lastly is CSS variables. CSS variables allow you to create a better structured CSS. They use the don't repeat yourself coding method to try and keep it nice and light. And then you can keep your code even lighter when CSS variables are available. But there's not a lot of support for CSS variables. So they should only be used to enhance the clients that do support them, like Apple Mail, Outlook, Yahoo, Samsung. Gmail doesn't support them, and Outlook doesn't support them. So what can you do with CSS variables? You can swap CSS values with one line. So I'll show you with some more code in a minute that is different ways that you can swap CSS values. You can simplify your interactive CSS by using CSS variables, since CSS variables are only supported in the clients that support interactive CSS. You could use variables in a larger email design system or larger design systems across the whole of your enterprise kind of huge company, if you've got a design system that covers web and email. If you use CSS variables, like, for example, Action Rocket has a red color, which is their brand color. If we were to change that ever, there's going to be hundreds of places that we need to change that red color. Whereas if we have that in a variable and we just change that one variable and it changes everywhere else, that makes our life a lot easier and a lot easier to maintain. And by using a CSS variable to do this, you won't be able to support it across all email clients. So you may have to use a pre-processor or a post-processor, depending on your workflow, that changes CSS variables to a hex code or something like that, so that it is supported everywhere. But it does mean that it will make your system a little bit more robust and a bit easier to change. And then lastly, you can use CSS variables to do dynamic maths and also show some results that are different in your email live. So you can add things, take things away using CSS variables in your emails. An example of this would be a dynamic cart calculation. So by taking dynamic variables that are pulled in either at the build, so you set your different prices for different products at the build, you can then use CSS variables and checked to choose different quantities. So in the example there, you could choose a range from 1 to 5. So in the CSS variables, we have $10.40. And then depending on the number you choose, 1 to 2, 3, 4, it will times that variable by the correct amount to give you the amount that's in there. And you could imagine if you had a shopping cart that had multiple products with multiple different prices, you could use the variables to add up lots of different numbers depending on what someone chose within an email. And you can combine CSS variables with the CSS calc function to add all these things and multiply things together to create different things. And then you can show the value of a product based on the quantity that's chosen. So one of the things that I really struggled with CSS variables was finding a way to show this in somewhere that does support it. So this is a little snippet that works only if your email client does support CSS variables. So anything you're going to do with variables, you can put inside this @supports query. So it's @supports and then 2-CSS and variables, and then everything that is specific to your CSS variables, you can just add inside those 2 curly braces. And the syntax for CSS variables, I'll run through because it's quite a new technique. And in the latest State of CSS survey from like last year, actually only 30% of web developers were using CSS variables throughout their designs. So it's relatively new to web development. So it's even newer to kind of email development. So it's probably a good idea just to go over the basics. So a CSS variable is related to an element. So we normally use root or HTML to say that it affects the whole of everything within the email. And then when you give a variable a name, you just start it with 2 dashes. So hyphen hyphen variable name, and you can add anything in there that is that makes sense, and that gives your variable name. And then after a colon, you give it a value, and the value is anything that you want it to be. So it can be a color, it can be a number, it can be a pixel or a point or a percentage. It doesn't matter, and you can put anything in that variable. When you want to use that variable, you then do the same again. You use an element, and then you use a CSS attribute. So for example, if my variable was a color, I would just add the attribute of color and then the variable, so var, and then in brackets, I'll just put the variable name, which is hyphen hyphen variable name. And lastly, if you wanted to give your variable a default, just in case the variable didn't work out or it didn't make sense or it wasn't the right format, inside those brackets, you can do a comma and then add your default. So here's an example of our Action Rocket red. So in the root is the element where the AR red can be used, and root is the whole of my HTML document. And then I've given it a name of AR red, and the value is the hashtag E00F41. And then on my button, I've given it a background color, so just shorthand to background, and then the variable I've used in brackets AR red. But just in case that didn't work, or I was pulling it from somewhere else, I gave it, in the last example, after the comma, I've just given it the normal CSS value of red, so that even if everything else is mucked up, there should still be a red that shows. One thing is important with this is that it is a default for the variable, but it isn't a fallback. So if CSS variables aren't supported, you would still need to say background and a certain color to make sure that it was still working. The comma red doesn't mean that it will fall back to that on all other email clients. Using CSS variables and calc is a little bit more complicated, but not that much. So in the same way that we'd use the variables inside another element, you can use variables inside other variables. So the 2 numbers there, 2 and 2, inside of a sum variable, we can use calc, open the calc with our brackets, and then you can list the variables. So you can variable number 1 space plus, so this adds them 2 together, and then variable number 2, we have var with the brackets and the variable number 2. And the really cool part that I found was that you can show this number. So that calc will kind of work out the number in the background, but to display that in HTML, we have to use the counter element. So in the example here, in that span class total, and then we've got a pound sign, we've used a class of total and then the pseudo selector of after. So that means that after the span, which is a class of total, we're going to show something. So after my total, I'm going to show a counter. And I'm going to reset my counter to have a variable. So I'm going to name it I'm going to name my counter reset variable. And then inside that, I'm going to name what I'm going to use. So I'm going to use that sum from before. So var, and then that sum in brackets. And then I'm going to name the content, which is going to come after my total. And it's going to be a counter. And inside it is going to be the variable. And that's how we show a live number inside of an email. And then lastly, I mentioned that you could change a CSS variable just with one line. So instead of having the constantly repeating attributes and changing numbers constantly throughout, and maybe adding an important to change it or something like that, with CSS variables, we can just change it by replacing the variable inside another media query. So in the code example there, in the body, we've given it a value of 20 pixels. But then afterwards, at the media screen with a max width of 400 pixels, they have the body again, so that's the element that is going to contain it, and then the value is now 50 pixels. So inside of that, it means that you are changing the value based on the size of the screen. So there's lots of different places where you could use this by changing the size of boxes or changing the layout of different parts of things, or even if you want to change the value of something depending on someone's looking at it on a bigger screen or a smaller screen. Okay. That's everything. So yeah, I'm Jay from Action Rocket, and if you want to get hold of me, you can get hold of me at emailj_, or my email address is j@actionrocket.co. I think that's everything, and I think I can answer some questions now. I think awesome, Thomas is going to appear.
Possibly. Yeah, awesome. Actually, that was actually a question. Real quick, someone wanted to know where they can follow you. So guys, take a quick note that you can follow Jay here on Twitter, and you can shoot him an email as well. So we can definitely mark that as a question. Cool. All right, man. Let's go ahead and get into some of these questions. We got lots of good ones in here. Let me see here. Okay, so first and foremost, looks like the first one we got is, all right, from Sean. Sean asked, would this live poll technique update every time the email is reopened or reclicked?
So it would only be live when it is clicked on. So so if you open an email, the first time you click on it, you'll get a live image. But then if you, in that instance, there wasn't a way to go back to click again. But if you closed the email, then reopened it, it would reload. So every single time you opened the email, it would refresh. And if you hadn't clicked on it within the email, it would be live until you actually clicked to vote. I hope that helps.
Oh, that makes sense. Cool. All right, moving on here. Okay, cool. Man, Jay, you've got a lot of questions. It sounds like the amount of help that you provide people today, it's definitely going to be helping a lot of people. Because a lot of people are asking, is there a training resource? This one's from Sarah, by the way. Is there a training resource where non-developer marketers can learn the basic coding needed for emails, or should it be left to professional coders? That's a good question.
No, you should definitely learn. I started off as a marketer with no code techniques at all and no idea. So I started to learn just like how to change a link or how to update colors within the HTML and CSS. And to be honest, the best resources are going on YouTube and just typing in HTML and CSS, or Free Code Camp is like the easiest one to go on. Check it out and find the beginner's guide, and you'll find lots of info on HTML and CSS on there. Email specifically, there's a couple of like Udemy courses, or Nicole Merlin, she created a course on Toots Plus, which gives you an idea on how to hybrid code, and that'll give you a great rundown of how to kind of create a desktop and mobile responsive email that works across all email clients. Nice. And we'll try and find some links and share those as well.
Cool. All right, guys, moving on here. Let's see. Okay, this one actually, this is kind of related to where people want to follow you on social media. But Caitlin asked, do you know of a good source for this? Even related to the last one, do you know a good source for a tutorial for how to code a dynamic and mobile and desktop friendly email for those who are new or intermediate to email coding? So kind of picking back off the last.
Yeah. I mean, basically all those same ones I mentioned before. And if you join the Email Geeks Slack group, then in the code channel, you can ask as many questions as you want. But there is often a question of where can I learn, and there's a whole GitHub full of resources specifically for email. So I'll try and find that and share it. But then also, if I don't find it or you're not sure, go on the Email Geeks Slack group, and they'll point you towards more than enough.
Yes. Definitely, Email Geeks group is a very helpful resource. You can apply to be part of that group. It's pretty close-knit group of people, so I highly recommend that.
I've written, and Megan, who's going to talk later, have written loads of blogs on the Email and Acid blog, which is all about these more advanced techniques, from hotspots to tap to reveal to loads of other things. So if you've kind of got a grasp of what HTML and CSS is and how you can use it, you can go ahead and look on the blog. I think you can just go to the code section in the blog and you can find loads of things. Or even on the Action Rocket emaildesignreview.com blog, they've got loads of blogs on like the more advanced nature of things as well. So nice. Good place to go and have a look.
Yeah, I'll definitely throw that in the chat earlier. Guys, check that out when you get a moment. Yeah, lots of blogs from Megan. You'll see Megan later on here in just a few sessions, and Jay as well. Cool. All right, moving on here. This is going from Jeremy. Jeremy asks, can you recommend a safe place to host an external style sheet if you don't have an adequate access to your company's web server?
I definitely recommend talking to your web team and getting it on the same server and on the same domain, because then there's less chance of, if you're using different domains to link to different things, there's a higher chance of spam or deliverability problems, sorry. So if you can talk to them, if not, then you can host files on GitHub, or even if you want to kind of just go online and find somewhere where you can set up your own web server and just make sure that it's secure, that no one can go on it, and then you should be fine. So kind of GitHub, or first priority is probably your own web domain. Or some ESPs do actually allow you to host CSS files, so talk to your ESP as well, and they may be able to do it for you.
There you go. Cool. All right, and then moving on here. Okay. Looks like Jody asked, what do you mean by pre or post processors for CSS variables?
So you could use something like Less or Sass, which is like a plugin that you can use. And basically, it's a development pathway where you would write all your CSS variables in your HTML, and then it would run it through a kind of processor. And then at the other end, it would spit out the CSS already made into what it should be. So there's quite a lot of those out there on the market. Or if you're using like an email editor, there's quite a few processes out there that will inline your CSS or grab the CSS and change different things. So just have a general look around. But if you just typed in online CSS variable processor or preprocessor, that would find it for you. And then it would just kind of move all the variables to hex codes or RGB or whatever you want them to be.
Nice. Okay. And there's one question that I want us to briefly touch on. I know, I think Ann Tomlin was able to give us a brief answer, but Taylor, this one actually came from Taylor. It was a comment in the chat. I thought it was a good point to bring up, but Taylor was asking, I was under the impression that with the new Apple privacy policy, live features like this wouldn't be deliverable. Is that not accurate? I guess that's just something to comment on.
So if your image is within the body of the email, then it will be downloaded as pre-processed, like we said, is mentioned before. There is a loophole at the moment. Apple may close it, but an external style sheet that has an image on it is not currently being prefetched. So if you have something on an external style sheet, you can still use live images. And also, from testing myself on using the Mail privacy protection, there's a big difference between the way the live images are used. So maybe a countdown image might not update exactly to the minute, but actually a lot of mine have been within a good kind of space of time. But a lot of the techniques, if you're not having like a countdown to a specific minute, if you're just updating an image live, then most of the time they're still working okay. But you're right, you do have to maybe think about that if you are thinking of using these things. Gotcha.
Did you hear that, guys? There's an Indiana Jones loophole. You can, for a brief time, it's open. You can get through.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Looks like we got one more here. This one's from Quack. Are you a proponent or opponent of CSS animations when used appropriately with fallbacks?
I use them quite a lot of the time, so I guess I'm a proponent of them. But I would say that there is a couple of techniques to make sure that they work in the right kind of way. So if you're using a CSS animation, they are only supported in certain Mail clients anyway, so you need to know that they only work in certain places. But also, if you use the prefers reduced motion CSS query, then you can make sure that if someone doesn't want things moving around, you can change the animations, either slow them down or stop them all completely. Or if you want to, you can use, if something's like moving around on the screen and you're just showing something moving and it's not after an interaction, then you can just use a GIF or something like that and appropriately set them so that they're not flashing too fast or moving too fast for accessibility reasons. So I always use them to kind of enhance someone's experience. So if, say, for example, you're opening an accordion and something expands, instead of it just shooting open and shooting closed all the time, I would slow it down so that it unravels slowly and appears nicely. And then when you click to close it, it will roll up nicely and it won't jolt everything and move everything around. So I would use CSS animations, but only in an appropriate place. And yeah, like I said, only really Apple Mail and some newer email clients do support them. So you're not going to get support across everywhere anyway.
Hey, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, well, Jay, that is all the time we have today. Jay, seriously, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking out your time of your day to be here. Trying to figure out what is going on with my screens. But yeah, man, I appreciate it. I'm so glad you got to be here with us. Thank you so much for being here for Email Camp. Pathwire thanks you. I thank you. Be careful on your way out. Hopefully no ghouls. Hopefully I won't jump you. I'm not going to be my Michael Myers long hair alternative self right now, but no. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great Halloween weekend, and we'll hope to see you soon. All right, man?
You too, definitely. And I'll be sticking around in the chat and answering as many questions as I can before I go anyway. And I'm checking out Paul's talk and Megan's talk as well. So I'll be around for a while.
Awesome. Guys, we got a lot of good friends here. So that's all the good vibes I love. Awesome. Good to see you, Jake. Thanks for being here.
Cheers. Bye.
Take it easy. Awesome, guys. Cool. Can I get some reactions in the chat for Jay's talk? That was great, y'all. That was Witch Please. Anything's possible in email. Code techniques to transform messages. Guys, that was Jay Orm, the senior coder and interactive email specialist from Action Rocket. Great guy.